The silence in the room wasn't empty, it was heavy. It pressed against the eardrums like deep water, a pressurized quiet that suggested something had recently died here. I sat in the leather chair, my spine molded into the groove of a seat I hadn't left in weeks, yet hadn't truly occupied in months. The room, my study, my command center, the engine room of this whole damn vessel was drowning in shadow. The only light came from the Venetian blinds, slicing the moonlight into jagged, horizontal bars across the floor. They looked like prison bars. That felt appropriate. I didn't move. In this line of work, you learn not to touch the evidence until you've photographed it with your eyes. You let the crime scene speak to you before you contaminate it with your clumsy intent. And this was a crime scene. Make no mistake. The desk in front of me was a sprawling landscape of neglect. Papers were stacked in precarious, leaning towers, their edges yellowing like old bruises. Maps of territories I had planned to conquer, projects, drafts, grand schemes, were buried under a fine layer of gray dust. It wasn't the honest dirt of work. It was the settled, suffocating dust of stagnation. It coated everything in a uniform matte gray, robbing the world of its dimension. I reached out, my hand moving through the gloom like a swimmer through crude oil. My fingers hovered over a fountain pen. It was an expensive piece, heavy brass coated in black lacquer, a weapon designed for a serious man. But it was uncapped. The ink had bled out onto the oak surface of the desk, drying into a black crusty pool. It looked like a gunshot wound that had stopped bleeding hours ago. "Waste," I whispered. My voice sounded foreign, like gravel grinding in a mixer. It was the voice of a man who had forgotten how to give orders. I turned my head slowly to the left. The movement made my neck crack, a sharp report in the dead air. I looked at the fireplace. This was where the heart was supposed to be. The hearth. The source. For years, this grate had roared with an inferno that kept the shadows at bay. It was the fire of ambition, the manic, crackling energy that woke me up at 4 a.m. and kept me hammering at the anvil until midnight. It used to throw dancing orange light against the walls, making the room feel alive, dangerous, and warm. Now, nothing. The grate was a mouthful of cold ash. I leaned forward, the leather of my chair groaning in protest, and peered into the darkness of the hearth. The moonlight filtered down the chimney, striking the pile of spent fuel. That's when I saw it. The color. It wasn't gray. The moonlight reacted with the chemical remnants of the burnout, turning the ash a sharp, crystalline ice blue. It glittered with a mocking beauty. It was the color of a frozen lung, the color of hypothermia. It was the temperature of absolute zero, where movement stops and life becomes a theory rather than a practice. I shivered. The cold wasn't just in the fireplace. It was radiating outward, seeping into the floorboards, climbing the legs of the desk, settling into the marrow of my bones. "Time of death?" I asked the empty room. The grandfather clock in the corner answered, "Tick, tock." It wasn't marking time, it was mocking it. The pendulum swung with a lazy, hypnotic rhythm, slicing the air back and forth. Tick, you're wasting it. Tock, it's gone. I stood up. The sudden verticality made the blood rush from my head, leaving me dizzy. I walked to the window and separated two slats of the blinds with my fingers. Outside, the city of my mind was dark. No lights in the windows of the creative districts. The factories of discipline were silent silhouettes against a charcoal sky. It looked like a ghost town. "Who did this?" I muttered. I began the mental procedural. I ran the list of usual suspects. Was it fatigue? No. Fatigue is a brute, a mugger who beats you up and leaves you in the alley, but you recover. Fatigue breaks bones, but it doesn't kill the fire. Was it failure? No. I'd taken hits before. Failure usually made the fire burn hotter, fueled by spite and the need for redemption. Failure was an arsonist, not a suffocator. I turned back to the room, pacing the perimeter. My shadow stretched long and thin across the wall, a distorted caricature of a detective. I walked past the bookshelf. I saw the titles on the spines. My old victories, the skills I had mastered, the knowledge I had hoarded, they looked like tombstones now. I stopped at the mirror hanging by the door. It was an old piece of glass, silvered and spotted with age. I wiped the surface with my sleeve, clearing a circle in the grime. The face staring back was familiar, but the eyes were wrong. The skin was pale, rendered in high contrast white against the gloom. The stubble on the jaw was black grit. But the eyes, the irises, had lost their warmth. They reflected the moonlight. They held that same deadly glittering ice blue. I stared at myself, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow to the gut. There was no break-in. The lock on the door was pristine. The windows were sealed tight. There was no struggle, no overturned furniture suggesting a fight for survival. The fire hadn't been doused with water. It had been starved. It had been ignored. Negligence, I said to the reflection. Criminal negligence. I was the warden. I was the one holding the keys. I was the one sworn to keep the fire fed, to keep the engine turning, to keep the perimeter secure. And I had fallen asleep at the post. I had let the drift set in. I had let the good enough creep in like carbon monoxide, odorless, colorless, and lethal. I looked down at my hands. They were clean. Too clean. They lacked the ink stains of the writer, the calluses of the warrior. They were the soft, pale hands of a bureaucrat managing a decline. I felt a surge of something. Not hope, not yet. But anger, a cold, hard anger. The kind of anger that doesn't scream, but plans. I walked back to the desk. I didn't sit down. I looked at the black pool of dried ink. I looked at the ice blue ash in the grate. "All right," I said. The word hung in the air, solid and heavy. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk. It stuck, warped by the dampness of the room, but I yanked it open with a snarl of effort. Inside, amidst the clutter of forgotten gadgets and wires, lay my notebook, a fresh one. Black cover, heavy paper. I slammed it onto the desk. The sound echoed like a gunshot, scattering the silence. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a fresh handkerchief. I wiped the dried blood ink off the brass pen. I capped it, then uncapped it again, testing the action. Click, click. The sound of a weapon being racked. I wasn't going to reignite the fire tonight. You don't start a furnace with a wish. You have to shovel the coal. You have to clear the ash. You have to dirty your hands. I grabbed my heavy trench coat from the rack. It smelled of old rain and stale tobacco, the scent of the past. I put it on, popping the collar against the chill. I walked to the door of the study. I put my hand on the brass knob. It was freezing cold. "I know you're in here," I said to the shadows. "I know you're hiding in the walls. Sloth, fear, ego. I know you stripped this place while I was sleeping." I turned the knob. I'm coming for you. I stepped out into the pitch-black hallway, leaving the ice-blue ruin of the study behind me. The investigation had begun. The suspect was me, but the killer was something else. And I was going to hunt it down room by room, hallway by hallway, until the fire roared again or the cold took me for good.